Rick and Morty is actually a tragedy, and an incredibly dark one at that. While many of its installments are episodic, there's an underlying story that is nothing short of both horrific and emotionally impactful, and it all revolves around our two protagonists and the true nature of their lives. I was honestly surprised in the best way at how deep the writing gets when you really look into it, and I'm not just using hyperbole to hype up the video. The overarching story of Rick and Morty goes to some genuinely dark and thought provoking places, and we're about to investigate all of it. Now, obviously, the entirety of the show often runs off of dark humor, a device that many adult cartoons utilize to strike reactions in the audience. However, this isn't what I'm talking about, although the horror that can be found in many of the episodic stories could have an entire video in of itself. We're looking at you, Rick Potion, Vat of Acid, and That's a Morte. Heck, the entire concept of Mr. Meeseeks is just brutal, as well as Morty's Mind Blowers, which is basically just a collection of this stuff, and there's a nearly limitless amount of other examples across the episodes that are more or less self contained. What this video is going to focus on is the larger narrative being told throughout the show, at times in the background and nuances, and at other times through episodes devoted entirely to the grander scheme. The best place to start is the main cast of characters, and as anyone familiar with the show is well aware, that means the Smith family, and of course, Rick Sanchez. The dynamic here is Rick being the father of Beth, who is married to Jerry, the two of them being the parents of Summer and Morty. For a good while, Beth's mother is pointedly absent from the show and rarely mentioned, but we'll get to all that rabbit hole later. Stories are driven by their characters, so to best understand why the story of Rick and Morty is so compelling, it is necessary to understand the inner workings of its main characters. We obviously have Rick, and we'll get into the specifics of his complicated psyche over the course of the video, but from the start, we can see that he's a super genius alcoholic old man with a rather dark outlook on reality. He displays many sociopathic traits and has a general vibe of everything and everyone will die one day, and that nothing really matters because the universe is so big. His technological capabilities knows no bounds, and he seemingly does stuff just for the sake of pleasure or experience. His daughter Beth has a pretty fiery spirit despite some lasting trauma from when Rick abandoned her for a long stretch of time years ago, and generally places herself as the authoritative rule over the household, given that her husband is much weaker willed than she is. She keeps Rick around due to the fact that she missed having a father for so long, and she lets him get away with so many outlandish antics due to the fact that she's afraid he'll abandon her again. Opposite to her is her husband, Jerry, who is different in every way. He is timid and submissive and has next to no fighting instinct, even when it comes to protecting his family at times. Together, they have two children, Summer, who is around 17 years old, and Morty, who is around 14 years old. Summer is oftentimes depicted as your stereotypical teenage girl, concerned with popularity and possessing a certain attitude that she knows better than most of the people around her. She isn't quite a popular girl, but isn't usually an outcast either, although her immediate family enjoys giving her crap from time to time. Finally, we have the other namesake of the show, Morty. He's characterized as being generally dumb and forgiving to a fault, which a person kinda has to be in order to constantly put up with Rick and his absurd adventures. One thing that becomes exceedingly clear in the show is this family is often dysfunctional. See, Jerry more or less accidentally got Beth pregnant with Summer towards the end of their high school years. Rick expresses his belief that because of this, Beth felt pressured to be with Jerry rather than genuinely selecting him as her soulmate. Due to this, and the combination of Jerry's stark contrast to Rick's personality, there is a vast rift between Beth's husband and her father, which causes household issues on the regular. Furthermore, even without the inserted drama by Rick's presence in the family, marital problems can be observed between Beth and Jerry in day to day scenarios. Their marriage is usually held together on a thread, something that is felt by Morty most, who expresses his concerns about his parents getting a divorce. The dynamic between Rick and Morty shifts and changes depending on their feelings towards each other. There are many deserved examples where Morty gets rightfully angry with Rick and they have a falling out. Honestly, the closest thing to a will they won't they that the show has is the camaraderie between Rick and Morty themselves and if their relationship will persevere through Rick's constant drunkenness and insanity. So, this is the Smith family, the main cast of characters for the show. The nuances of the family dynamic are always changing and growing over the course of the show, with Beth and Jerry going on an arc where they do get divorced and eventually back together, Rick and Morty having several falling outs, and Beth even gets cloned at one point, which effectively adds a new member to the family, something we'll talk about a little bit more later on. Obviously, the main driving force behind the lore of the show is Rick Sanchez, and the truth surrounding his past is what delves into the darker depths of the storyline. It is clear right away that Beth's mother and his wife is pointedly absent from the show. Mentions to her are scarce, and narratively, one begins to suspect a grander story being hinted at. What is obvious is that Rick's perception of love is quite negative. Take this line he speaks in mid season 1 during an episode that is entirely shaped around Morty chasing love from his school crush, Jessica. I hate to break it to you, but what people call love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. On the one hand, this could be Rick being his typical insensitive scientist self, expressing the concept of love in a bare bones physiological sense. But given the fact that he has a daughter that he does display affection towards, one can't help but think Rick is speaking through a traumatized lens. That perhaps he once had a true experience with love but is hardened in the wake of its absence. On this topic, there is a related trait of Rick that is important to discuss. By all means, he is a sociopath. He shows a complete disregard for life, whether it be human or alien, and won't even flinch when people die for completely trivial reasons that result entirely from his doing. However, in between the constant barrage of insults he berates them with, he does show a level of care for his family. As previously discussed, there is an affection for Beth present in his persona, and even in the earliest seasons, he goes out of his way to help out Morty in multiple scenarios. In the very first episode, he straight up murders someone bullying Morty at school, and sure, Rick doesn't give much of a crap about anyone disconnected from his inner circle, but you can't help but think such an immediate violent response was triggered due to the bully's aggression towards Morty. Another similar example is when Rick specifically goes out of his way and briefly returns to a place they just escaped, only to kill a being that assaulted Morty. These two actions make it clear from the beginning you don't mess with Morty, which is a precedent that remains somewhat consistent throughout the show. Now, this is a theme that will become more evident and further elaborated upon as we progress further through the show and the character developments, but due to a major event that happens early on, now would be a good time to discuss what I believe dictates the level of emotional attachment Rick has to a person. See, Rick's lack of care for the loss of any given thing largely comes from the fact that he has access to the infinite multiverse, which allows virtually anything to be replaceable. Anything lost can be regained, any consequence can be undone simply by hopping to another reality. However, what cannot be so easily replaced is specific experience between individuals. While Rick certainly can and has journeyed to realities where the dynamic with the family is so similar to the previous reality that any difference is indistinguishable, when people get harder to replace is when they accompany Rick on his multiversal travels. Finding a family that has the same bonding experiences that have been created through the several absurd adventures he had across multiple realities with the family, even in the infinite multiverse, would be a significant task. Furthermore, there's something to be said about forming an attachment to someone through shared experiences that, even if an identical replica was found, can't quite be replaced in the mind. And while this is jumping forward in the timeline, this type of philosophy can be seen in Rick when he eventually clones Beth. He specifically ensures that he does not know which is the clone and which is the original. What other purpose would this be than to ensure that he cares about each of them equally? After all, at the time of cloning, they would have been the same. As most people could probably sympathize with, Rick was uncertain that he'd be able to think of the clone as the same way he could think of the original, and to bypass this problem, he ensured that he wouldn't have the knowledge as to which was which. This same idea can be applied to universal variants. Even if Rick could find a Morty that had a nearly identical relationship with him, in his mind, he would always know that he isn't truly the Morty he went on all those prior adventures with, a line of thinking that lends itself to the reasons why Rick has formed an emotional attachment with this Morty specifically. With that being said, we can keep this in mind when we see Rick escape the first universe we see in the show, as his Earth is essentially ruined. He helps Morty get out of there along with him, but leaves behind the rest of the Smith family, pretty conscience free, I might add, while Morty is understandably haunted from the experience. They slip into the lost lives of their counterparts in the new universe and can get settled in easily with the family as they are virtually identical to the old one. That being said, Morty's family who was left behind now gets to live through the apocalypse every day. Just because Rick leaves behind consequences doesn't mean they don't still happen. This scenario further establishes the idea that Rick's care is bound to shared experience. At this point, he has spent much more time bonding with Morty through their sci fi adventures than he has with the rest of his introductory iteration of the Smith family, who, as any fans of the show know, aren't even his original family to begin with. Another moment that displays Rick's hidden genuine affection for Morty comes in an episode that serves as the first exposure to the location called the Citadel, a collection of Ricks who, seeking refuge from the different governments that were after them, ironically ended up forming their own government entirely constructed of Ricks. Here it is revealed that each Rick has a detectable brainwave due to their unnatural genius. And in order to make themselves undetectable, they need Morty's nearby them, due to Morty's having the opposite brainwaves that sort of counter or mask the Rick waves. It's clear that many Ricks are just using their Mortys as a shield, viewing them more as a protective asset than a valued partner. However, while our Rick, who is labeled as C137, is getting his brain forcibly downloaded, we see him tear up over memories of Morty, a rare display of true tender emotion. Furthermore, he bothers to comfort Morty after the boy expresses his concerns over the fact that so many pairs of Ricks and Mortys might devalue their relationship or existence as a whole. To this, Rick responds with the bold statement that he is the Rickest Rick, and that it would only make sense that the Rickest Rick would have the Mortiest Morty, a sentiment that does succeed in making Morty feel special. This self declared Rickest Rick label was created in response to Morty accusing Rick of being unable to connect with people, which starkly displays what usually characterizes a Rick as a Rick, emotionally lacking to the extent of being sociopathic. However, given all the examples we've discussed so far, it is clear that our Rick, C137, can and does care even if he refuses to show it in most scenarios. This is reinforced by the finale of Season 1. Throughout the show so far, Rick has occasionally used the phrase wubba lubba dub dub, which is revealed to have an actual meaning that recontextualizes it entirely. It is a phrase from bird person's language that is used to express deep emptiness and pain, and is used as a sort of cry for help. Bird person then goes on to say that Rick is constantly chasing different stimulations and highs due to the fact that he is trying to numb himself from the deep pain within him. This is one of the first times the series explicitly calls out Rick's inner turmoil that really drives the character. But what exactly is this inner turmoil? Up to this point, one could easily suspect that it has something to do with his absent wife named Diane, and that guess is further solidified by Rick's behavior surrounding Bird Person's wedding. He says things like, weddings are basically funerals with cake, and regarding marriage, I couldn't make it work, and I could turn a black hole into a sun. What are the bets that this is all a lie we tell ourselves because we're afraid to die alone? Because that's how we all die, alone. Once again, we see Rick being sensitive around romantic subjects and essentially trying to ruin the concept for others. When the wedding goes completely awry, we also see Rick get very distressed when Bird Person gets shot, showing that he does indeed feel emotion when certain people die if they have a connection as previously discussed, and Bird Person, like Morty, is an example of someone who has traveled the universe with Rick. At the end of this episode, we also get to see a rather noble decision of Rick. He sacrifices his own freedom for the good of the family, of which he has a photo on his person, I'll point out, which then directly leads to the next episode where we get the first good look at Rick's past. Now, the exact nature of Rick's history is revealed throughout the show, so I'm not going to go episode to episode pointing out the different references and hints, but rather just compile the timeline in this section. What is important to note about the first episode we really get a good context for his past is that he vehemently denies the validity of it and that it's just a fake backstory. Furthermore, after defeating a galactic empire, destroying the Rick Citadel, and helping the family and freeing Earth, Rick sabotages all of this by telling Morty all the ways everything he did could be considered as selfish, and most memorably, that he's only in it for a limited edition McDonald's sauce, and that's his driving motivation. This behavior very obviously displays that he's avoiding acknowledging the true horrors of his past by selling it as fake and masking his true desires. But what is most interesting is the pattern of relationship sabotage whenever he could get close to connecting with someone, a theme we'll get back to later. For now, it's finally time to delve into Rick Sanchez's past and see exactly what makes this show so tragic. Originally, Rick C-137 was very much a family man. He was in love with his wife Diane and cared for his young daughter Beth. However, his scientific pursuits were taking time away from his family, and after a string of failures at portal travel, he was considering giving up the whole science thing as a whole. One day, while working in his garage, a version of himself from a different universe appeared, the person that would go on to be known as Rick Prime. Prime offered him access to the infinite multiverse, something that could effectively make him godlike, hanging out with endless versions of himself. Rick C-137 passed on this offer, though, clearly desiring to stay back with his family. Prime's response to this is a bit disbelieving, as he claims that Ricks don't pass on this, to which C-137 says, I'm a different kind of Rick, I guess. This line serves as a fantastic irony. C-137, throughout the early show, was parading himself as the Rickest Rick, a title that encompasses a character that only cares about science and displays a lack of love or emotion towards those around him. But in reality, when it all began, C-137 was in fact the least Rick. The reasons behind his shift in persona is nothing short of heartbreaking. In retaliation of C-137's refusal and love for his family, Prime murdered Diane and little Beth right in front of him with a bomb that he dropped into his own garage. This devastated Rick, and he regressed into a deep depression until he was fueled by a burning desire for revenge and used that motivation to discover the key to interdimensional travel for himself. He later describes this event as That's the 3 lines of math that separated my life as a man from my life as an unfeeling ghost. As Rick traveled the multiverse searching for his family's killer, he came to a horrifying discovery. Diane isn't just dead in his universe, she is dead in every single one. Prime used something called the Omega device to erase Diane from infinity, effectively killing every iteration of her to exist, stripping every Rick everywhere from their wife, which is why so many of them are unfeeling ghosts. Obviously, in real life, we can't travel to different universes, so when we lose a loved one, they are just as gone as if they had been Omega deviced. But Rick's loss is a special one for one main reason. He can replace absolutely anything and anyone with his access to infinity, except the one person that he loved the most. Anything he ever wants is at his fingertips, except the thing that matters the most to him. With this realization, there's only one motivation left for him: kill Rick Prime. Except, Prime is incredibly smart and crafty and good at hiding. He's incredibly hard to find. So C-137 just starts killing any version of himself he can find, then scanning them to see if they were Prime. He does this for who knows how long, murdering probably thousands of versions of himself over the years, but never being able to find Rick Prime. Eventually, he grows tired of all the multiversal killing of himself and effectively starts the Citadel he would later come to hate and even destroy. All of this wraps into a line that Morty once said: Ricks hate themselves the most. Feeling as though he belongs nowhere and that nothing matters, Rick makes one last ditch effort. He travels to Prime's original universe, the one that he abandoned long ago, and lives there in hopes that he might return one day. He reunites with Prime's family, Beth, Summer, and Morty. The Morty that Rick has been going on adventures with this whole time, the one that we've been proving Rick has a special emotional attachment to, is in reality the grandson of the person that murdered Rick's family and erased his wife from infinity. It gives a completely new horrifying context to the entire show. That first family he was with was actually Prime's family that he had slipped into. Morty was actually related to Prime this entire time. And even though in the wake of his great suffering, Rick has become an alcoholic and a high chasing sociopath, he has still managed to forge a bond with a grandson that isn't really his, and is in fact family with the version of himself he hates the most. Despite years having gone by, Rick has never really given up the hope that he could exact revenge on Rick Prime, and this becomes a big plot point as the show goes on. To explain how he finally makes progress on his decades long and multiversal spanning quest for revenge, we must now shift our attention to the other overarching story embedded into the show, one that is equally as dark: the lore behind the character known as Evil Morty. Evil Morty is a driving force behind many of the plots surrounding the Citadel. He's revealed to be the true puppet master behind the Rick that was hunting down and killing Ricks along with downloading their brains, and he even managed to become president of the fallen Citadel in the wake of its destruction at the hands of C-137. Evil Morty's backstory is rather simple. He's just a Morty that finally had enough of his Rick. One night, after his Rick got drunk out of his mind, he took over his body and controlled it remotely through his eye patch, then went on a quest across the multiverse to kill a bunch of Ricks and download their brains, essentially accumulating the genius of multiple Ricks. Furthermore, to hide himself and cloak his operation, he would steal their Mortys and create a Morty dome around his base, putting them in constant pain so as to better hide himself from the Ricks that might be searching for him. Evil Morty is motivated by his hatred of how Ricks treat their Mortys, yet he is willing to sacrifice and torture Mortys for the sake of his end goal, that being to escape the central finite curve. The finite curve is the name given to the proverbial wall that the Ricks built around infinity, separating the infinite universes where Rick is the smartest man in the universe from the infinite multiverse where he isn't. Effectively, what this means as far as interdimensional travel goes is that all the Mortys inside the curve are forever stuck with Ricks, and the interdimensional traveling Ricks are forever stuck with each other. Furthermore, as a part of ensuring they are protected from tracking due to the opposite brainwaves, the Ricks of the Citadel have begun cloning Mortys rather than finding universes where they exist organically, then going on to essentially groom them for submission and forgiveness to whatever Rick they get assigned to. Evil Morty refers to this as an infinite crib built around an infinite baby, an infinite smear of one crappy old man. In his monologue, he explains how Ricks view themselves as the underdogs, as they all believe they are the victims of each other. A perpetual cycle of hating oneself and hating the other versions of oneself, the catalyst for a lot of this all tracing back to the evil of Rick Prime, with Morty's caught in the middle, the very reason for their existence for a lot of them just to be a tool for Ricks. Evil Morty just wants to escape the curve, to be rid of Rick forever, and he doesn't care how many Ricks and enslaved Mortys he has to kill to do it. In the finale of Season 5, he accomplishes his goal and does just that. However, the paths of C-137 and Evil Morty would cross again after the hunt for Rick Prime intensifies once again. As Evil Morty puts it, C-137 is basically fracking the curve, merging dimensions to consolidate the decoys of Prime in order to eventually find the real one and kill him. The interdimensional shockwaves from this can be felt even outside the curve, which enticed evil Morty to come see what was happening and why. In flexing his superiority, Evil Morty helps C-137 in getting real close to finally finding Rick Prime, which results in springing a trap that brings them all to a confined space where Prime has constructed a game for any Ricks that come close to finding him. Kill each other, and the last remaining Rick will get their Diane back. This is of course a lie, and after C-137 and his duo of Mortys comes out on top, they narrowly escape. The good news is they finally have the means of pinpointing Prime's location, and after C-137 immediately goes to finally find him, the two Mortys follow. Evil Morty's primary motivation is fear of the Omega device. He wants to be in control of it so that he knows nobody else is. A climactic battle ensues when Rick finally faces his nemesis after all these years, ending with C-137 nearly killed. Evil Morty is able to incapacitate Prime and revive C-137, even letting our Rick have the final face-off with his nemesis as he secures the Omega device. C-137 opts to beat Prime to death one punch at a time, as the villain gets in his last words. "You're welcome, by the way. I made you. I showed you infinity. And what did you do with it? Hang out with my grandson? Raise echoes of my daughter? What's your life without me? Admit it. You would have been me. I just walked into your garage before you walked into mine. But eventually you did. You lived in my house." After this, our Rick emerges, covered in the blood of his enemy with an emotionless expression on his face. After all this time, he was finally triumphant, but he certainly doesn't look like the victory made any difference. "How's it feel?" Evil Morty asks. "Better? No? Exactly the same? Yeah, it always does. I hope you're happy with your choice." Just because Rick Prime is dead doesn't mean Diane is back. Rick succeeded in killing his enemy, but the emptiness remains, and is maybe even amplified now that his purpose of hunting down Prime is over. His emotionless face as the next few scenes go by silently screams one thing: what now? Ever since his family was killed, one thing has been clear. Rick has struggled with moving on. He's been perpetually stuck in his pain, trying his best to numb it with alcohol and other substances, always distracting himself with wacky adventures and expressing his turmoil through being a jerk to those around him. He even made the automated voice in his car, based after his wife's, designed his house to haunt him in her absence. All of Rick's inner demons are brought to light in the most recent episode and the finale to Season 7. For some reason, in a Denny's restaurant, there's a hole known as the Fear Hole. Entering it will force you to face many of your fears, only letting you escape once you manage to conquer your greatest fear. All around, this is a really good episode, with fun thematic elements, a twist towards the end, and the idea that Morty's greatest fear is his reliance on Rick. However, what's really interesting about this episode is the look into Rick's fears that we get. The Fear Hole creates its own version of Diane, and we get to see Rick interact with her. He expresses how she's the only thing he can't replace, and also how terrible life has been without her. In regards to alcohol, he says that he was looking for his wife at the bottom of every bottle. One thing that becomes clear throughout the episode is that Rick's fear is a vastly complicated one. His greatest fear is of being happy. He understands better than anyone that all happiness is temporary, and furthermore, Rick has already lost his happiness once. He fears being happy again, because if he is, he risks losing it all again. This coincides with everything we've seen out of Rick throughout the show, and explains his constant sabotage of relationships with the family even after he's done something good for them. The big twist reveal of the episode is that the Fear Hole is completely centered around Morty, and that Rick was never really in it. When Morty somewhat carelessly mentions that Diane was in there, Rick runs back to the hole and we can see his temptation to jump in. But he doesn't. Instead, he turns to the board of people who escaped the hole, takes a photo of Morty out of his wallet, and proudly pins it on the board. The symbolism here is epic. Rick deciding against going the hole to see a facsimile of Diane and instead highlighting Morty's victory over the hole shows that Morty is slowly helping him move on from the pain of losing his original family. Morty didn't only succeed in conquering his own greatest fears in the hole, but is helping Rick overcome his greatest fear every day. It's beautifully poetic. Through the grandson of the man who took everything from him, Rick is learning to love and be happy again. Miraculous is a cartoon show that, for the longest time, I thought was simply for young girls, but upon my sister forcing me to watch the whole thing, I discovered that a deep and rather dark storyline permeates over the entirety of the larger narrative. Much like the other deceptively innocent media I've covered on the channel, there is not only thought-provoking themes embedded into the very heart of the plot, but also moments of true horrific nature. That being said, let's delve into the darker side of Miraculous, Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir. As is the case with most shows that aim for longevity, the past and true nature of the timeline is revealed slowly over the course of multiple seasons, but for the purpose of this video, we will be looking at the lore from a rather linear perspective. As such, laying down the extensive groundwork for the universe that this story takes place in is the most logical first step to this particular narrative dissection. One of the most essential concepts to understand is the mystical beings that populate this world known as kwamis. These are cosmic entities that embody the different concepts that construct reality. For instance, the main two that we follow in most of the episodes are Tiki, the Kwami of creation, and Plag, the Kwami of destruction. These are obviously opposite concepts, but both are present within physical reality and must exist in tandem with one another, therefore being represented by separate entities. The specific supernatural powers that these beings possess naturally coincide with the concept that they represent. Tiki can manifest things into existence, and Plag can utterly destroy, at times on an apocalyptic scale. He is canonically credited to be the cause for the extinction of the dinosaurs in the show. Their true forms are imposing cosmic creatures with voices of power, although they primarily interact with the human world in much smaller, cuter, and semi childish reflections of themselves. Tiki and Plag, being the figureheads for the two pillars of existence required for the physical realm, can merge together to bring rise to Gimme, the Kwami of reality. This ultra powerful Kwami is known for one main trait: the ability to rewrite reality entirely based upon a wish of the person who summoned them. This is done by uniting the Miraculous, fusing Plag and Tiki, and then confronting Gimme with the wish. Which brings us to the namesake of the show. Miraculous is the name given to objects that basically host the essence of a given Kwami, allowing them to be possessed by a human master who can utilize their powers by transforming into either a hero or villain, dependent upon their motivations and intentions. The intended purpose of this function is to maintain protection and order to the human world, but as we'll soon discuss, these powers can also be utilized negatively. Many of the very powerful Miraculous are contained within something called the Mother Box, and are guarded by an appointed guardian of the Miraculous by a long standing organization dedicated to ensuring their safety and wise distribution to human holders when need be. Now that the setup for the universe the story takes place in is complete, we can get into the beginnings of the timeline, specifically following the threads that display the darker parts of the extensive lore. Obviously, that means there are many parts of the story I'm not going to cover, but if you are a fan of the show and would like to see me cover some different aspects of the story, comment your suggestions and I may do them in a future video. As for now, the catalyst for the brewing darkness that surrounds this series revolves around two sisters. Emily and Amelie were two princesses who grew up with differing personalities. Emily was more adventurous, unruly, and defiant than the royal family thought appropriate, and this resulted in them sending her to Paris for a while. However, this decision backfired on their desires as she fell in love with Gabriel Agreste, who, at the time, was a humble tailor, thus renouncing her noble rank as an aristocrat to be with him, much to her parents' anger and dismay. The two of them would go on to become happily married and hopelessly in love. Emily was beginning to look like the only option for a child to turn out the way the royal family wanted, so they pressured her into marrying a wealthy American named Colt Fathom. Because of this, it seems Emily's marriage was done out of parental pressure and a sense of duty rather than any kind of true love, while Emily got to enjoy authentic romance in Paris. However, it wouldn't be long before both sisters would encounter a difficulty in their lives. Both sets of couples wanted to have children in order to make their family dynamic complete, but try as they might, it quickly became evident that both of the sisters suffered from infertility. Even the best remedies at their disposal, given their ties to royalty and whatnot, couldn't cure this trait within them. As one can imagine, this saddened the couples greatly, hope for offspring of their own growing dimmer as they continued looking for solutions. However, eventually, they would discover a mystical solution to their problem, what would at first appear as a blessing but would quickly reveal itself to be somewhat of a curse as well. From old photos, we can see that Gabriel, Emily, and a woman named Natalie had a passion for exploring at one point, and during an overseas trip, they made some discoveries that would forever alter the course of the timeline. A book full of information pertaining to the history of the Miraculous, something that is said to be Emily's last gift to Gabriel, and two Miraculouses along with their respective Kwamis, those being the Miraculous of the butterfly and the Miraculous of the peacock. There's a story as to how they came to be where they were eventually discovered, centering around one of the would-be guardians named Fu, but that's a tale for another time. What is important to the situation at hand is that the Miraculous of the Peacock and access to the powers of the Kwami known as Dusu seem to be an answer to their prayers. Dusu has the power to create life itself, utilizing the will of the user and an enchantment of a specific object. It didn't take long for the couple to realize this could be the key to creating a child of their own, and Emily used the magical power to do just that. Thus, Adrian was born, a young boy who would grow up believing he was a natural born child just like everyone else. And in a way, he was. While there was a moment of triumph for Gabriel and Emily, Colt, the husband of Emily, became all too jealous that Gabriel was able to have a child and he wasn't. After Colt confronted them in a fit of emotion, Emily decided to allow Colt to use Dusu's power as well. I imagine this was primarily done out of love for her sister and not Colt, as he is characterized as rather brutish. This gave birth to Emily and Colt's son, Felix, who Adrian would come to know as a cousin. These two boys, created from a mystical source, both go on to become pivotal to the storyline of the series, despite the fact that they lived vastly different lives during their upbringing. For a good while, Adrian got to have a pretty good family lifestyle. His father had become super successful in his fashion career with his brand excelling, Adrian was on track to be a recognizable model for the brand, and he had two parents that loved him. However, this era of happiness was always doomed to come to an end, as the Peacock Miraculous was damaged, and using a Miraculous in that state proves fatal to a human being. Emily fell ill, a sickness that would get progressively worse. This spiraled Gabriel into a madness, as he loved her so much he couldn't imagine a life without her. This decline Emily is going through all started because of their desire to have a child, one that they were able to achieve against all odds, but their success would be the very thing that ended up killing Emily. It is similar to when a mother dies during a childbirth, a tragic incident that laces an event that should be joyous, the arrival of a new life into the world, with sadness and loss. While in this case Emily and her child were alive for years before she effectively died, the emotional turmoil is similar. Due to the existence of one person Gabriel loves, the other person that he loved was condemned to leave him. Gabriel wasn't willing to accept the loss of his beloved wife, though. While the rest of the world believed she went missing and was eventually presumed dead as a result, in reality Gabriel had her comatose body preserved in a glass coffin like device in a large basement area below his mansion. While Adrian is completely oblivious to this, Natalie knows and goes on to become one of Gabriel's most trusted people from this point forward. Natalie is compliant with Gabriel's increasing grief induced insanity because she genuinely cares for him. She has had a crush on him since the early years, and seems to still carry some kind of torch for him to this day. Gabriel routinely abuses this dynamic to keep Natalie bending to his desires, although he does display a certain level of care for her as well. But his obsession with Emily never fades enough for him to pursue any real romance with Natalie. On the other side of all this is Felix, who is arguably suffering through even worse family drama than Adrian is. Cole also grew sick just as Emily did, given that he used the same broken Miraculous to create his son Felix. Due to this, Cole began to see Felix as a sort of curse along with the magic that created him. As such, he started calling him a monster to his face, subjecting him to all kinds of demeaning abuse. Something important about these Centimonsters created by the Peacock Miraculous is that they can be controlled by those who possess the object that the Amok, the feather charged with magical energy that gave life to the Centimonster. As such, Cole was able to control his son, with Felix having to obey despite inwardly not wanting to. Similarly, whoever possessed at least one of the rings that was used to manifest Adrian, they would have control over him, which Gabriel utilizes at times during the show. This was a cycle of control and abuse that reflects some real world dysfunctional family scenarios, up until Colt died from his sickness. In the wake of this, Felix was left with his mother and severe emotional baggage from the years spent with his spiteful father. This developed Felix to become resentful, but more importantly, influenced his rise as a cunning and deviously smart individual as he began to create schemes to finally achieve his own desires. And all this is only the beginning of how heavy this show actually gets. Now, we can clearly see the roots as to why I consider this show to be surprisingly dark compared to what it seems to be on the surface. At the heart of the story is it's a tragic tale of dysfunctional families, abused children, and overarching themes of love and loss, all incorporated into a larger narrative that revolves around mystical beings and cosmic powers. Gabriel's descent into madness was just beginning, though. He became privy to the fact that uniting the Kwami of creation and destruction would grant him one wish from the Kwami of reality, and devoted himself to acquiring the two miraculous that held Tiki and Plag at all costs. Knowing that the best way to find them was to provoke the superheroes that used their powers to protect Earth from disaster, Ladybug and Cat Noir, Gabriel utilized the Miraculous of the Butterfly to create supervillains in order to stir up chaos and prompt the heroes to come and try to stop them, the plan being to steal their Miraculous once they were defeated. During this time that Gabriel was secretly terrorizing Paris, he would go by three different supervillain titles dependent on his current powers: Hawkmoth, Shadowmoth, and then Monarch. The way in which he would turn ordinary people into supervillains coincides perfectly with the deeper themes of the story. He will take an innocent butterfly, evilize it with his powers, then use it to akumatize a person going through great emotional distress, in turn gaining a limited amount of influence over their actions and granting them power that matches with their emotional turmoil. Although Ladybug possesses a power that essentially resets the damage that was caused while these people were supervillains, and they don't have proper recollection of it afterwards, the terror of what they are doing in the moment is very real, and countless people had to have either died or gotten hurt during the rampages of some of the higher level threats. Gabriel would continue to do this relentlessly, obsessive over defeating Ladybug and Cat Noir and in turn resurrecting his wife. He doesn't care that there are consequences to making a wish that rewrites reality. Given that existence must always be balanced, if he were to bring Emily back to life, someone else would have to essentially die in her place. In his mad pursuits, he even allows Natalie to use the Peacock Miraculous while it was still damaged to help him meet his goals, which only resulted in her getting terminally ill as well. Even Gabriel himself was willing to take a fatal wound that would slowly kill him to continue his obsessive plans. All while this is happening in the Agreste family, Felix is creating schemes of his own, concocting plans as to how to steal the Peacock Miraculous, even greatly empowering Gabriel, who he discovered was the big bad looming over Paris, in order to meet these ends. And Adrian, of course, is caught in the middle of all of this, oblivious to pretty much all of it, but suffering the ramifications nonetheless. The One Punch Man may carry a comedic tone for most of its runtime, and Saitama is considered by many to be more of a gag character. The show has deep thematic material that serves as both a backbone for the main plot and a source of inspiration when relating it to real life. In this video, we are delving into a special side of the One Punch Man lore, the interwoven concepts and themes that serve as truly motivating ideals when put under careful analysis. Let's begin with an overview of the world we are dealing with here. The most important points to the material being discussed in this video all revolve around the Hero Association and the characters that exist in and around it. The Hero Association is an organized system that superheroes of this world operate in. In many ways, it is a type of hero government. Heroes within it are given ranks based on several factors, power levels being one of the most influential. The ranks are as follows in ascending order: Class C, B, A, and then most respected of all, Class S. This world is also commonly plagued by wacky creatures of varying powers and abilities, generally called monsters, that are often at odds with the heroes. Civilians living in the cities are put in peril frequently, and many people have developed deep appreciation for the heroes that protect them, with the upper Class A and Class S heroes being treated like celebrities in some cases. Amongst this societal structure is a man named Saitama, who serves as the show's protagonist. Our dissection of the grander themes that the narrative has to offer can begin with him. In the present day, he is the strongest hero that the world has alive. True to the show's name, we see him repeatedly take down the most powerful of monsters and enemies in a singular blow that usually doesn't even appear to have required much effort put into it. He wasn't always this strong, though. In fact, he started out as a pretty ordinary human, his physical capabilities being presumably quite average up until he was 22 years old. According to him, he gained his power through 3 years of focused training that involved 100 push ups, 100 sit ups, 100 squats, and a 10K run every day. Side notes to the regimen included 3 meals a day and disallowing yourself to use any kind of temperature control in order to strengthen your mind. Saitama claims that all this training is what made him go bald, as he worked so hard that his hair literally fell out. Obviously, this workout routine wouldn't result in his level of power in reality. He's seen literally destroying asteroids, enormous monsters, and inconceivably powerful beings. Furthermore, his body itself is absurdly durable. He's able to absorb blows and survive unscathed, maintaining a nonchalant attitude during the most intense of fights. This is something his disciple, a cyborg named Genos, calls out the absurdity of, at first believing that Saitama is attempting to fool him. However, it seems Saitama genuinely believes this is all he did to acquire his power. The important thematic takeaway from Saitama's training journey is obviously that hard work pays off. It is trying to display the importance of diligently training to work towards a goal of betterment that you have set for yourself, enduring it without rest for years at a time until you have acquired what you were after. While this specific instance is focusing on physical strength and power, this theme can extend to any goal, aspiration, or ambition that anyone out there has. The constant remains the same. If you truly want something, you must work hard for it, always continuing to train to the best you can be if it's what you truly want. To add on to this, Saitama's inspiration to embark on this quest for physical power is rooted in an inherently virtuous concept: becoming a hero. Not only was Saitama pursuing self improvement, but a self improvement that would become a betterment for the world around him. I think this can be interpreted into an angle that shows how talent should not only be acquired for your own ambition, but so that it can be shared with the world for the good of everyone. Tying into this theme is another that the show briefly highlights. Keeping busy and motivated with these goals of self improvement can save you from spiraling into a more parasitic existence where you seek only easy living and pleasure. After Saitama encountered a group of self-declared revolutionists who wished to no longer be required to work, Saitama notices some parallels in their lifestyle and ponders as to whether or not he could have ended up like them had he taken a wrong step somewhere along the way. If he hadn't decided to stick with his self-motivation instead of becoming a strong hero, could he have become unemployed and spiteful towards a society that wouldn't allow him to be as lazy as he desired? He looks to be seriously wondering. Furthermore, there's a particular trait of Saitama's persona that is especially admirable. He doesn't seem to care about any of the superficial stuff that so much emphasis has been placed on, like fame and fortune or rankings mandated by the association and the subsequent reverence that could follow if placed highly enough. Instead, as Saitama's catchphrase says, he's just a hero for fun. He possesses unnatural amounts of power, yet doesn't go about seeking all kinds of attention and admiration for it. He appears to be perfectly content with an otherwise simple lifestyle, taking out monsters both for enjoyment and for the sake of saving the city. Besides not actively seeking out tangible reward for his power, Saitama's actions directly display his lack of care around such things. Two major examples happen in the show, the first being after he single-handedly and near effortlessly took out a Sea King, a monster of great strength that easily wiped the floor with several other heroes. One of the defeated was Moomin Rider, who displayed a tremendous amount of courage in the face of insurmountable odds, a scene we'll come back to later. Saitama sees this and respects the bravery they all displayed, and how these heroes gave it their all despite being defeated. When people in the crowd who saw how easily he took down the Sea King began attributing it to the supposed fact that the monster must be weak, and therefore the heroes that fought it especially weak, Saitama protects their reputation by sacrificing his own, pretending that they weakened the monster so much that he could swoop in and take care of it without much effort. He publicly makes himself look like a credit-stealing jerk in order to preserve the admiration for the other heroes involved in the fight. I suspect he probably recognized that they put far more effort into their fights than he did into his, and respects them for it. He may be vastly more powerful than all of them combined, but due to that, he puts significantly less effort into his fights, and has a general lack of bravery due to his confidence that he can easily survive and beat any opponent he comes across. Like he tells Moomin Rider after rescuing him, you should be proud of yourself. The other instance I want to bring up is the situation concerning the Class S hero named King, who is regarded as the strongest man alive. In truth, he's an ordinary person with no remarkable powers. He's just gotten lucky in that monsters keep being in his vicinity and getting defeated, credit for their defeat then being attributed to him. Many of these scenarios involved Saitama being the person that truly defeated them. However, when Saitama discovers this, he isn't angry and he doesn't even demand that King come clean. Instead, he recognizes that many people already see King as an icon and look up to him as a great hero. So he recommends that he legitimately get strong. This also loops back to the idea of imagining what you want and putting the work in to reach the goal, the opposite of this deception that King has been running with thus far. The main idea, though, is that Saitama is once again looking out for the good of King and the people who idolize him, rather than trying to regain his credit or expose a fraud that has been stealing it. The two of them even go on to become friends, showing the true extent of Saitama's forgiveness. For a synopsis of the overall thematic material being presented here, the idea that being a hero doesn't always result in a tangible reward, and if you are truly acting as a hero, you shouldn't care about fortune or fame. Coming off the heels of this, I want to mention a sub-theme that sort of spirals out of this one, which is the difference between doing something out of independent desire and doing something in a job-like environment. After discovering that heroes who aren't registered with the association are regarded as weirdos by the public, Saitama decides to join and promptly gets placed in Class C. He broke every record in the physical test, but performed incredibly poorly on the written exam that goes along with it. However, a requirement of Class C involves a weekly quota of criminals being brought in. This makes taking down villains and monsters a job-like requirement, which Saitama quickly finds to add a layer of stress and boredom to what he used to do for other purposes. There is obviously a much larger factor contributing to Saitama's boredom, but that will be brought up later. The point here is that enjoyment is almost always better when you are not pressured into doing the very activity that you enjoy. Doing things for yourself is often funner than doing something when it's mandated by someone else. Transitioning to a new topic, another theme that runs strong in the show is a difference between bravery and foolish pride or ego protection. See, largely due to their ranking system, many of the classes below S are eager to prove themselves as equal heroes, and will therefore often get themselves into fights they simply cannot handle without assistance. This kind of hubris results in these prideful heroes receiving beatdowns as they try to tackle an enemy far beyond their abilities just to protect their egos or prove some point that becomes meaningless in the face of such danger. Once again, this idea is highlighted in a couple areas that we'll specifically call out. After joining a martial arts tournament in an attempt to momentarily cure his boredom and bag some prize money, Saitama encounters many martial artists that are very full of themselves and their power. The other contestant that made it to the finals is especially this way, highly confident in his abilities and even claiming that he seeks out competition for thrill and pleasure. That last sentiment isn't entirely unlike Saitama in many respects, and a cool moment is when our protagonist tells him that if he really wants to have fun, he shouldn't get any stronger. The end of the tournament gets derailed when hyper-powerful monsters emerge, a couple of which mercilessly beat on the finalist. Eventually, when his life is on the verge of ending, he swallows his pride and screams for help, to which Saitama hears him and easily destroys the monsters, saving his life. This whole sequence displays the idea that while confidence in your own strength can be a good thing, you have to know when to call on someone else for help. If you are outclassed or outmatched, there is no sense in dying or failing, simply because your ego won't allow you to acknowledge that you require the help of someone else. Another instance that shows this theme in a similar fashion is towards the end of Season 2, when a squad of Class A heroes attempt to take down the Hero Hunter. They are doing this without calling in any Class S heroes, so that they can prove they are worth just as much as them. However, it quickly becomes apparent that the Hero Hunter is a threat far beyond even their combined capabilities. Most of them are too stubborn to even consider trying to contact more powerful heroes, but with his last bit of consciousness, someone who is more of a support person to the heroes manages to send out a sort of distress signal to a Class S hero, and Genos responds to come in and help. Just another example of the merit of knowing when you require assistance from someone stronger, and that knowledge in itself displays inner strength. However, there is something to be said about the bravery of fearlessly taking on an opponent you know is far stronger than you. It is not always reckless or prideful, sometimes it truly is heroic. The prime example of this comes in the form of my favorite character in the show, Moomin Rider. See, he is a Class C hero who is little more than an ordinary human on a bike. However, whenever people or other heroes are in danger, he is quick to step up to offer any help he possibly can. The clearest display of his courage takes place during the fight with the Sea King. This monster from the ocean has bodied heroes of higher rank and power than Moomin Rider, yet he stands defiantly before him. In this moment, there are a group of people that the Sea King has threatened to slaughter, and currently Moomin Rider is the only thing left standing to defend them. He's going to take on the Sea King, not out of vanity or pride, but out of duty as a hero. He will give it his all and fight to the death, knowing very well he has no chance at victory, as long as he could possibly help save these people. This is a display of courage and bravery unlike the other examples previously given. Even though it's a similar type of scenario, the mindset of the hero is in a virtuous place, solidifying Moomin Rider as one of the most heroic heroes in the show, despite his general weakness. Given that strength and power are some of the driving factors of the show, it makes sense that we see different methods of attaining power. While the Saitama method, extreme dedication and hard work, is portrayed as the admirable path to walk, some people begin to give in to a temptation that promises quickly gained power, turning into a monster. People who seek power beyond their current capabilities are coerced into taking a monster cell that transforms them into a disfigured beast, a thirst for violence typically following. The message here is obvious. Finding shortcuts to strength through dark means, such as sacrificing your humanity, strips away what should be the point of becoming strong in the first place. Just as we use Saitama as an anchor for much of the thematic material found in the show, we'll now move on to Garo, the hero hunter, who is being built up in many ways to be a dark reflection of Saitama. If you're watching this video, that probably means you're interested in storylines, and one of the best ways to consume stories is through reading books. For the past 6 years, I've been writing and self-publishing novels to Amazon, which can be read in both digital and paperback form. Overall, I write in the science fiction genre, but each book has a slightly different nuance that will appeal to people invested in other genres as well. Do you enjoy high-concept sci-fi? Linear Highway and Genesis Prince of Time should hit the spot. More of a spiritual horror fan? Cult of Shadows has a soul-shaking story to get lost in. Or perhaps you're into more of a mystery, better yet, a mystery that prompts you to put the pieces together and solve the narrative for yourself. In that case, Frameless Mirror should be perfect. If you enjoy stories and reading, please check out my authors page on Amazon and find the book that appeals to you. Or perhaps even delve into the entire Lloyd Salt series. A huge thanks to anyone who considers this, links are in the description, and now back to the video. Garo has made it his life mission to take down the most powerful heroes one by one, displaying his superiority over them and solidifying himself as a symbol of fear in the heart of every hero. He's so driven by this goal due to his childhood, in which he suffered at the hands of other children obsessed with heroes. Garo was always sympathetic towards the monster when it came to fights, easily able to project himself into their point of view. A specific example of this was when a group of children were talking about a show they liked to watch called Justice Man. In the particular episode they were discussing, they were triumphantly regaling how Justice Man killed the monster named Crab Demon. Garo couldn't help but interject in the conversation, pointing out how Crowd Demon was just trying to protect his egg and his home from the rampant pollution harming the ocean, and never gave up even when all the odds were stacked against him, only to be killed by these so-called heroes that the other children are idolizing. This delves into the complexity of morality and how the world can't be so simply divided into good and evil all of the time. Crabdeven may be a monster, and he may be doing harmful things, but his motivations clearly stem from the fact that people are actively destroying his home and endangering his offspring. When he lashes out against this, what from his perspective is a wrongdoing against him and his kin, heroes gang up on him and kill him. His egg is left without a caretaker, and his home will continue to be destroyed, whilst everyone else celebrates another victory for the heroes. The kids around Gyro blindly worship these heroes because that's who they have been told are the good guys. Heroes are the popular ones, and therefore their perspective is the only one that matters to all these children. Garo, however, can see things from the monster's perspective and feels compassion for them. He can see the murky soup of gray that is life, rather than the black and white lens that his peers are looking through. When he speaks his mind, however, the children call him a freak, hold him down and gang up on him, beating him while he can't fight back. But when he defends himself, he's the one that gets in trouble with the adults. His story of events gets cast aside, and he feels isolated and alone. One thought makes it to the forefront of his mind: the popular win and the hated lose. Somewhere along the line, he vowed to become the monster that everyone around him always wanted him to be, and would devote his life to striving to become a symbol of fear to all heroes. He even once declared that he rejects both good and evil, becoming disillusioned with both concepts. Overall, Garo's character displays the complexity of morality and how heroes and villains change based on whose perspective you are looking through. He feels that he is lashing out against a world that is rigged against the unfortunate, yet his actions are not the correct response either. By lurking around and hunting these heroes, he is incapacitating them during times of crisis in which they could be helping other people. While the societal system may be flawed, that doesn't mean that every hero who is a part of it is, but Garo hunts them indiscriminately. All that being said, Garo has this rageful fire embedded deep into his spirit and will not stop until he has met his goal, not unlike how Saitama did when deciding to become a hero. These characters are similar enough and opposite enough to be great foil characters to one another, and further accentuate the themes that can be found in each of their stories. A man that had trained incredibly hard to become a hero, and a man that will stop at nothing to become a monster. Another major topic of the show that I want to cover is inspiration and the path of learning, and how people who are sources of good can have more effect on the world around them than they know. Saitama, throughout his career being a hero, has inspired several people to become better versions of themselves, even become heroes as well. Heck, he technically knocked over the domino that inspired the creation of the entire Hero Association by saving this kid back when he was just a normal guy. He doesn't care about popularity, ranking, or even receiving credit for his exploits, yet he has a noticeable positive effect on his entire environment. People are becoming inspired by his strength and using that inspiration to make themselves into stronger and better people. The show even loosely highlights how it is never too late to begin the journey of self-improvement. When Genos, the cyborg seeking to learn from Saitama, expresses his desire to train and get stronger, Saitama is confident that he can achieve it easily, given that he is only 19, and Saitama didn't even start his training until he was 22. A lot of people out there don't understand how young they actually are, and this moment shows how if you truly want to attain something, regardless of age or life position, you just have to embark on the path even if it seems long and daunting. The only way to complete a journey is by grinding through every step. Furthermore, a helpful method to reaching your ambitions is by learning from the best. Like how Geno studies the ways of Saitama, following the advice from those that have already attained what you seek can be incredibly advantageous to your journey. It shouldn't be seen as a weakness to learn from those that are stronger than you, but as wisdom to use them as stepping stones as you slowly climb closer to your goal. And if you keep your eyes set on the good that you can use your built up talents for, you may start to have a positive influence on the people and society around you. To close this video on the thematic material found within One Punch Man, I want to talk about Saitama's greatest enemy, the troubles of being the strongest. A major element of his character is the fact that he's experiencing boredom with life. No monster or villain poses any kind of challenge to him anymore. One blow can defeat even the strongest of adversaries. When having a deep discussion about his feelings with King, Saitama expresses how numb he feels, as if there is nothing more for him to learn, nothing more for him to strive for. It is not dissimilar from the common sentiment heard in real life. It's lonely at the top. King, however, makes an excellent counterpoint to Saitama's expressed numbness. There is so much to the world, and if you feel as though you can't learn anything more about something, perhaps you need to push yourself out of your comfort zone. Travel to new locations, take on new hobbies. Even something as simple as video gaming seems to ignite a passion within Saitama, as he is terrible at it compared to King. It may just be video games, but still, it is an example of a new skill for Saitama to master. Furthermore, and probably the most important takeaway of the scene, there is far more to a talent than raw strength, especially when it comes to being a hero. There are several intrinsic values that can always be grown, mental toughness, and philosophical understanding that can be tested and explored. The moral here is that the path of learning and improvement can never truly end, no matter what form it may take, and that everyone should constantly strive to improve themselves for the betterment of oneself and the world around them. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of the thematic concepts that serve as the heartbeat for the lore of One Punch Man, and if you did, a like and comment go a long way for helping out the video. If you like discussions and theories surrounding storylines and lore found within various forms of media, make sure to subscribe to keep up with the channel's content. As for now, the unknown persists, so the investigation continues.
Instead of overthinking your setbacks, just focus on moving forward.